Imagine being just 17 years old, when most boys are worrying about school, first love, or the future, and instead finding yourself standing in the shadow of a global war, where one wrong word can mean death, where silence can save thousands, and where courage is measured not by age, but by what you are willing to lose. Because in World War II, there was a boy so young the uniform did not quite fit him, yet brave enough to step into the darkest corners of history. And this is not a legend, not a movie, but a real chapter of American wartime intelligence that stayed hidden for decades. A story of fear, lies, sacrifice, and a quiet hero who carried the weight of nations on shoulders that had barely finished growing. Welcome to Untold Golden History, where forgotten truths rise again. And today we uncover the extraordinary journey of the youngest American spy of World War II, a 17-year-old who risked everything so others could live. He was born during hard times, raised in a country still healing from the Great Depression, where every meal mattered and every dollar counted. And from an early age, he learned responsibility faster than most children, watching his parents struggle, listening to radio broadcasts about a world slowly sliding into chaos, hearing names like Hitler, Pearl Harbor, and Europe spoken with fear and anger. And when the United States entered the war, something inside him changed forever. Because while others talked about serving someday, he felt an urgent pull to serve now, even though he was still legally a child. The recruitment did not happen in a dramatic office with flags and medals, but quietly, almost accidentally, because wartime intelligence was always watching for sharp minds, quick eyes, and people who could blend in. And this boy had grown up around docks, rail yards, and immigrant neighborhoods, learning accents, habits, and silence. And when an intelligence officer noticed how easily he listened without speaking and remembered details others forgot, a door opened that should not have opened for someone his age. To pass through it, he lied, not out of arrogance, but out of burning determination, adding years to his age on paper, signing forms with hands that trembled only slightly, knowing that if the truth came out, he would be sent home in shame, and if he succeeded, he might never be known at all. Training was brief and brutal, because war did not wait for perfection, and he learned codes, invisible ink, dead drops, and how to notice when someone was following him without turning around. He learned how to control his breathing when fear flooded his chest, how to destroy documents in seconds, how to remember faces even in the dark, and how to accept that capture did not mean rescue, it meant interrogation, torture, and likely death. When he was finally sent behind enemy lines, he did not feel like a hero. He felt like a child pretending to be a man, stepping into occupied territory where the wrong accent or the wrong look could end his life. And yet he walked because he believed the mission mattered more than his fear. His tasks sounded simple on paper, but were deadly in reality. Carrying messages hidden in clothing seams, memorizing troop movements while pretending to be an ordinary laborer, watching trains roll by and counting cars under his breath, noting symbols, schedules, and faces, then disappearing back into crowds that could turn on him at any moment. Every knock on a door made his heart race. Every checkpoint felt like a final exam with no second chance. And sometimes he slept in abandoned buildings, hungry and cold, replaying instructions in his mind like prayers, because mistakes were not forgiven in war. There were moments when he almost quit, when he missed home so deeply it hurt to breathe, when he remembered his mother's voice and wondered if she would ever know what he had done, and when he saw cruelty so raw it shattered any illusion of glory, because he witnessed civilians punished, innocents arrested, and lives erased in silence. And these images stayed with him long after the missions ended.
Still, he continued, sending information that traveled through secret channels, crossing borders faster than armies, reaching commanders who used those details to reroute troops, protect convoys, and plan operations that saved thousands of Allied soldiers, even though they would never know the boy who helped them survive. Recognition did not come with applause or parades, because intelligence victories are often invisible, and when the war ended, he returned home older inside than his years could explain, carrying memories he could not share, bound by secrecy that followed him into adulthood, while the world celebrated generals and soldiers whose names filled newspapers. Only much later did fragments of his story emerge, confirming that his reports had influenced major decisions and prevented disasters, proving that courage does not wait for adulthood, and that history is shaped not only by famous leaders, but also by young souls who step forward when they should still be protected. His legacy is not just about espionage, but about innocence meeting responsibility, about fear transformed into purpose, and about the quiet realization that even in the cruel machinery of war, a single brave teenager can become a ray of hope, reminding us that heroism has no age, only a choice, and that some of the most powerful acts in history are carried out in silence by those who never expected to be remembered.
As the war pressed on and the world around him grew darker, the 17-year-old spy learned that survival was not just about courage, but about discipline, patience, and emotional control, because fear could betray him faster than any enemy soldier. Each new assignment pushed him deeper into danger, farther from anything familiar, and closer to the thin line between life and death. He moved through cities scarred by bombings, villages emptied by fear, and roads watched by suspicious eyes, always carrying the invisible weight of secrets that could change the course of battles. He learned to read silence, to understand when a pause in conversation meant suspicion, when a glance meant danger, and when a smile was a mask hiding cruelty. In occupied territories, people learned to distrust even kindness because betrayal often came wrapped in friendly words, and this made his work even more exhausting because every interaction demanded careful calculation. There were nights when he hid in basements while air raid sirens screamed overhead, feeling the earth shake, dust falling from ceilings, wondering if history would bury him before his mission ever reached its destination. During one critical operation, he was tasked with observing enemy troop movements near a rail hub that fed supplies to the front lines, a location crawling with guards, informants, and patrols trained to spot anything unusual. Disguised as a teenage laborer, he carried tools instead of weapons, dirt on his hands instead of medals, and memorized schedules while pretending to rest, counting boots, trucks, and artillery pieces, storing each detail in his mind, because writing anything down could mean death if discovered. At checkpoints, soldiers questioned him sharply, sometimes laughing at his youth, sometimes glaring with suspicion, and he learned to answer simply, never volunteering information, never appearing too intelligent, because intelligence itself could raise alarms. Once, an officer held his papers for a long moment, eyes scanning his face, and in that frozen second he accepted that this might be the end, feeling an almost peaceful clarity wash over him, only to be dismissed with a wave of the hand that sent him walking away on legs that felt unreal. His intelligence reports traveled through networks of resistance members and secret couriers, passing hand to hand, crossing borders under constant threat, eventually reaching Allied command centers where analysts pieced together the puzzle of enemy movements, supply shortages, and strategic weaknesses. Unknown to the boy, generals studied maps altered by his observations, adjusted bombing targets, delayed offensives, and rerouted troops based on information gathered by a teenager who could not legally vote.
Yet with every success came increased risk, because enemy counterintelligence grew more aggressive, arrests increased, and whispers spread of spies hidden among civilians, creating an atmosphere where anyone could be turned in for a reward or out of fear. The boy learned of fellow operatives captured and never heard from again, stories of interrogations that ended in silence, and this knowledge haunted him, forcing him to confront the possibility that his youth would not save him if caught. Despite this, he continued, driven by a sense of responsibility that outweighed self-preservation, believing that if he stopped, others might die. In rare moments of quiet, he remembered his childhood, baseball games, school hallways, and simple dreams that now felt like fragments from another lifetime, and these memories both comforted and tortured him, reminding him of what he was fighting for and what he was losing. When the Allies launched major offensives, he felt both pride and dread. Pride knowing his work played a part, dread knowing that victories were paid for in blood, and that his information, while saving lives, also guided destruction. This moral weight pressed heavily on him, forcing a realization that war did not offer clean victories, only necessary ones, and that growing up inside such choices carved permanent marks on the soul. As months passed, his handlers noticed his reliability, his precision, and his calm under pressure, entrusting him with more complex tasks that required coordination with resistance cells and quick decision-making without guidance, because communication delays could be fatal. During one mission, a sudden sweep forced him to destroy materials and escape through unfamiliar terrain, navigating by memory and instinct, hiding in fields as searchlights swept the ground, listening to dogs bark in the distance, every sound amplified by terror. He survived not by strength, but by restraint, waiting hours without moving, breathing shallowly, understanding that patience could be more powerful than action. Eventually, the tide of war began to turn decisively. Enemy lines weakened, and rumors of collapse spread quietly. But danger remained until the very end, because desperation often made occupiers more brutal. When liberation finally came to areas he had once crossed in fear, celebrations filled the streets, but he stood apart, unable to fully join, because his role required continued silence, and the habits of secrecy had become part of who he was. Returning home after the war felt strange, because while the country celebrated victory, he felt disconnected, older than his peers, carrying memories that did not fit into normal conversation, bound by oaths that prevented him from sharing his truth, even with family. Official recognition came quietly, through classified commendations and private acknowledgments, but no public ceremony could fully honor what he had endured, because intelligence work thrived in shadows.
Over time, historians uncovered fragments of his contributions, declassified documents revealing how critical his intelligence had been, and slowly his story emerged as a testament to youthful courage, sacrifice, and the hidden architecture of victory. His life after the war was shaped by resilience, discipline, and a deep understanding of human nature, lessons learned not in classrooms but in occupied streets and whispered exchanges. And though he rarely spoke of his past, his actions continued to reflect the values forged in wartime, proving that heroism does not end when the guns fall silent. As the years passed after the war, the young spy's internal battles did not end with peace treaties or victory parades, because the mind remembers what history books often erase. He carried with him the weight of faces seen in fear, the sound of boots echoing in narrow streets, and the constant awareness that survival had come at a price that could never be fully repaid. While his friends spoke of college plans, careers, and families, he struggled to reconnect with a version of himself that had existed before deception and danger became daily routines. The discipline that once kept him alive now made ordinary life feel strangely hollow, because when you have lived with constant threat,
peace can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Yet he adapted, just as he always had, channeling his experiences into quiet strength, learning to listen more than he spoke, and finding purpose in service rather than recognition. Declassified intelligence files would later show that some of the most precise operational adjustments during the war were linked directly to his field reports, details so small they seemed insignificant at the time, yet powerful enough to alter outcomes. He had learned that history often turns not on grand speeches, but on tiny, well-observed facts delivered at the right moment. During one especially tense period late in the war, he was sent to verify rumors of a planned enemy withdrawal masked as a trap, a mission requiring him to observe patterns over days without being noticed. He blended into the rhythm of daily life, watching supply trucks that arrived lighter than before, listening to soldiers complain of shortages, and noticing the subtle shift in morale that signaled defeat long before official announcements. His confirmation helped Allied commanders avoid a disastrous advance, saving countless lives, though he would never know the full scope of that impact until decades later. The emotional cost of such knowledge was heavy, because understanding the consequences of one's actions in war means accepting both lives saved and lives lost, a realization that forced maturity far beyond his years. Flashbacks followed him into adulthood, sudden and vivid, triggered by sounds or smells that transported him back to occupied streets. And though he rarely spoke of these moments, they shaped his empathy for others who carried unseen wounds. He developed a deep respect for silence, understanding that not all truths need to be spoken to be honored, and that some sacrifices gain meaning precisely because they are not loudly celebrated. When historians finally pieced together his role, they described him not as fearless, but as extraordinarily disciplined, someone who acted despite fear. And this distinction mattered, because courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward while carrying it. His story challenged the assumption that youth equals weakness, revealing instead that adaptability, observation, and moral clarity can exist long before adulthood officially begins. In interviews conducted late in his life, he spoke cautiously, choosing words with care, emphasizing teamwork over individual glory, and reminding listeners that espionage success depended on countless unnamed people who risked everything without expectation of reward. He acknowledged the cruelty he witnessed, the innocents destroyed by war, and the moments of despair that nearly broke him. But he also spoke of unexpected kindness, strangers who helped without knowing why, and brief flashes of humanity that sustained him in the darkest moments. These memories formed a complex emotional landscape, neither purely tragic nor purely triumphant, but deeply human. His realization, shaped over decades, was that war forces impossible choices on ordinary people, and that judging those choices requires humility and compassion. As public awareness of his story grew, it inspired younger generations, not by glorifying conflict, but by highlighting responsibility, ethical awareness, and the importance of critical thinking even under pressure. Teachers used his example to discuss history beyond dates and battles, focusing instead on individual agency within vast systems of power. He remained uncomfortable with praise, preferring to frame his actions as necessary rather than heroic, yet those who studied his life understood that necessity does not erase bravery. In his later years, he supported veterans' causes quietly, advocating for mental health recognition long before it became common, drawing from his own struggles with memories that refused to fade. His life became a bridge between generations, connecting those who lived through total war with those who only knew it through screens and textbooks. The legacy he left was not a single dramatic moment, but a continuous demonstration of integrity under pressure, of choosing responsibility over safety, and of understanding that even the youngest voices can shape history when guided by purpose. His story, once hidden behind classified stamps and sealed archives, now stands as a reminder that history's most powerful forces are often carried by individuals who never intended to be heroes, but became them through quiet resolve.
As time moved forward and distance grew between the war and the present, the meaning of what the young spy had done began to change, even for himself, because memory softened some edges while sharpening others, and the questions that once felt urgent slowly transformed into reflections about fate, chance, and responsibility. He often wondered what would have happened if he had been caught on any of those countless days, if a guard had looked closer, if a passerby had chosen fear over kindness, and this awareness made him deeply conscious of how fragile history truly is. The world remembers wars through dates and victories, but he remembered them through moments, a raised eyebrow, a delayed train, a missed patrol, each one a turning point that could have erased his future. He came to understand that survival was not proof of superiority or destiny, but a combination of preparation, help from others, and sheer luck, and this humility shaped the rest of his life. When he eventually built a family, he carried these lessons into his role as a parent, valuing honesty, resilience, and empathy, while shielding his children from the darker details of his past, believing that innocence deserved protection. Still, fragments slipped through, in the form of caution, in the way he scanned rooms automatically, in the calm authority he projected during crises, traits that hinted at experiences far beyond ordinary life. Society around him changed rapidly. Wars came and went. New conflicts replaced old ones in headlines, yet he remained anchored by the belief that individuals still mattered, that choices made in quiet moments could ripple outward in ways never fully understood. When younger intelligence officers studied World War II operations, they found his case unusual not only because of his age, but because of the consistency and reliability of his intelligence under extreme pressure, a quality that modern training programs struggled to replicate. Analysts noted how his youth allowed him to move unnoticed, underestimated by enemies who assumed danger wore an older face, turning what should have been a weakness into a strategic advantage. This realization reframed how intelligence agencies thought about recruitment, adaptability, and the role of perception in warfare. Despite these professional acknowledgments, public awareness remained limited for years, constrained by classification and the quiet culture of espionage, and he accepted this anonymity as part of the cost of his service. There were moments, however, when recognition surfaced unexpectedly. A historian's letter, a veteran's handshake, a declassified footnote that confirmed his contribution, and each instance brought a complex mix of pride and sorrow. Pride in knowing his efforts mattered, sorrow for those who never returned to see history remember them. He often spoke of those lost, resistance members, couriers, civilians, emphasizing that his story could not be separated from theirs, because intelligence is never the work of one person alone. The cruelty he witnessed during the war never fully faded. Images of punishment inflicted on innocents, of fear used as control, and these memories reinforced his belief that power without accountability leads to suffering, a lesson he carried into his civic life and conversations about leadership. He believed deeply that understanding history was essential to preventing its darkest chapters from repeating, not through blame, but through awareness and empathy. When asked why he volunteered so young, he explained that youth often carries a clarity that adulthood complicates, a simple understanding of right and wrong before compromise sets in, and that this clarity gave him strength when doubt threatened to overwhelm him. Yet he never romanticized his decision, acknowledging the fear, confusion, and pain that accompanied it, and warning against narratives that glorify war without acknowledging its cost.
His reflections revealed a profound realization that courage is not a permanent state, but a series of choices made again and again, often in isolation, often without reassurance that those choices are correct. As his story gradually reached a wider audience, it resonated not because it was extraordinary in spectacle, but because it was deeply human. A teenager placed in impossible circumstances, responding with responsibility beyond his years. Educators and storytellers highlighted his experience to illustrate how history is shaped not only by leaders, but by ordinary people acting under extraordinary pressure. The emotional core of his journey lay in the tension between innocence and duty, a child stepping into a world of deception and violence, carrying that burden quietly into adulthood. Even in old age, he believed that the true measure of his actions was not medals or mentions, but the lives spared through information delivered at great personal risk. This belief grounded him, offering peace amid lingering memories. As he looked back, he recognized that the war had taken something from him that could never be fully restored, a carefree youth, a sense of uncomplicated safety, but it had also given him a lifelong commitment to integrity, compassion, and service. In this balance of loss and purpose, he found meaning, accepting that history rarely offers perfect outcomes, only choices made under pressure and their consequences. His journey stands as a reminder that even the youngest among us can carry profound responsibility, that age does not define capacity for courage, and that the quiet decisions of a 17-year-old can echo across decades, shaping outcomes far beyond what he could have imagined at the time.
As the final decades of his life unfolded, the young spy who had once moved through war-torn streets began to see his experiences through the lens of time, not as isolated acts of bravery, but as part of a much larger human struggle between fear and conscience. He watched the world debate new wars on television, hearing familiar language about security and sacrifice, and felt a quiet ache knowing how easily words could hide the reality faced by those on the ground. His memories gave him a deep skepticism of simple answers, because he knew that behind every strategic decision were individuals forced to live with consequences long after headlines faded. When students and researchers sought him out, he encouraged them to look beyond hero narratives and focus instead on systems, pressures, and the ethical weight carried by those who operate in secrecy. He spoke about how being young had made him adaptable, open, and observant, but also vulnerable, and how that vulnerability sharpened his awareness of others' suffering. He remembered moments during the war when he could have chosen safety, moments when turning away would have been easier, and these memories reminded him that moral courage is often quiet and uncelebrated. As declassification continued, additional documents surfaced, confirming how frequently his intelligence intersected with pivotal moments, supply line disruptions, avoided ambushes, and safer routes for advancing forces, each one a small thread woven into the broader fabric of Allied success. These confirmations brought closure, but also reopened old wounds, because each revealed operation carried echoes of fear, loss, and responsibility. He often reflected on the concept of karma, not as punishment or reward, but as realization, an understanding that actions ripple outward, shaping futures in ways unseen at the time. This realization guided his interactions, making him patient with others' mistakes and firm in his belief that accountability matters. In community discussions, he emphasized the importance of protecting young people from being romanticized as tools of conflict, even as he acknowledged that extraordinary circumstances sometimes demand extraordinary contributions. He believed that the goal of remembering his story was not to encourage children to fight wars, but to remind leaders of the cost when they ask the young to bear adult burdens.
In quieter moments, he returned to the simple joys denied to him during his teenage years, appreciating small routines, shared meals, conversations without coded meaning, and the freedom to speak openly without fear. These everyday experiences became symbols of what he had protected through his silence and risk. As his health declined, he prepared to leave behind not instructions, but understanding, trusting future generations to learn from history rather than repeat it. His final reflections centered on hope, the belief that awareness and empathy could reduce the need for secrecy and sacrifice. When he passed, tributes described him not as the youngest spy, but as a reminder that courage and conscience can coexist even under the harshest conditions. His life closed a circle that began with a teenager stepping into darkness and ended with a legacy of quiet illumination, showing that even in the most cruel chapters of history, human dignity can endure. In the final chapter of his journey, the story of the 17-year-old who became the youngest American spy in World War II reaches its quiet but complete ending, not with explosions or applause, but with understanding. As historians finalized their research and educators shared his life as a case study of responsibility under pressure, the full arc of his experience became clear. A boy shaped by hardship, pulled into history's most violent conflict, and transformed by choices made when turning back was easier than moving forward. His life proved that war does not only create soldiers, it creates witnesses, people who carry truths long after weapons fall silent. He often said that the hardest part was not the danger, but the secrecy, living among people who could not know who he really was or what he had done, learning to smile while hiding fear, learning to listen while remaining unseen. This invisibility, once a survival skill, became a lifelong habit, making him more observant, more reflective, and deeply aware of how easily human stories can be erased. Yet through the gradual unveiling of classified records, his contribution found its rightful place, not as a myth, but as a documented reality supported by data, timelines, and operational outcomes. Analysts confirmed that his intelligence had directly influenced decisions that prevented catastrophic losses, validating what had once been known only to a few. This confirmation did not change how he viewed himself, because he never believed heroism was about recognition, but it changed how history viewed the power of youth when guided by purpose. His story closed the gap between innocence and experience, revealing how a teenager's sense of right and wrong can remain intact even when exposed to cruelty. It showed that emotional strength is not about suppressing feeling, but about acting despite it, and that heartbreak does not weaken courage, it refines it. In remembering him, people were forced to confront uncomfortable truths, that wars are often fought by the young, that intelligence work depends on trust and sacrifice, and that moral clarity can emerge in the most confusing circumstances. His life offered a ray of hope, not because it glorified conflict, but because it demonstrated the enduring human capacity to choose responsibility over fear. As the final pages of his story settled into history, one realization remained undeniable: that age is not a measure of impact, and that even the quiet footsteps of a 17-year-old can leave marks deep enough to shape the fate of nations. With that realization, his story stands complete, a fully told chapter of untold golden history, honoring not only one young spy, but all the unseen individuals whose courage lives on in the freedoms they helped secure. Discover the hidden heroes of WWII. Subscribe or follow Untold Golden History for stories history tried to hide.